My name is Matthew T.E.J.A.S. I'm the Executive Director of Air Alliance Houston, and I'm going to describe the Texas Healthy Port Communities Network. This idea came after really some of the fallout from the November 2010 elections, where so many of the things that my organization and many other organizations around the state of Texas and the United States have been working on were really dealt a serious blow all in one night. And after looking at what had happened with that election and what had happened to so many of the priorities and initiatives that we'd been working on, we came to the conclusion, and I think a lot of folks around the country came to the conclusion, that one of the major weaknesses of so much of our advocacy is that we really didn't have the affected communities, the grassroots communities that we're essentially working for. We didn't have them organized. We didn't have them stably funded. We didn't have the real community voices out there able to speak up, not only in unison with the more established groups locally or nationwide, but that really they should be leading the charge, and they should be leading our efforts. And we started to look much closer to home to what was going on, not just in Port of Houston or the Port of Houston area, but a little broader up and down the Texas coast. And that's one of the places where, whether you're working on refinery issues or chemical issues or goods movement, the Texas coast has a huge amount of those industries and those affected communities. You might even say the majority of those in the United States are on the Texas coast, but there's very little support and infrastructure for communities on the Texas coast to work for themselves. So we started looking at some of the partners we already had on the Texas coast. Some people like Hilton Kelly in Port Arthur, who has the Community in Power and Development Association, or Juan Paras here in Houston, Susie Canales with Communities for Environmental Justice down in Corpus Christi, and some newer partners like the Galveston Baykeeper, Environmental Community Advocates of Galena Park, again here in Houston, some new groups like the Clean Energy Coalition down in Corpus Christi, or Adelis in the Brownsville area. And we saw that, well, really we have quite a few groups, community organizations, community leaders on the Texas coast, but there really isn't an organized method for getting support for each other from outside sources. And we thought that that was a good role that Air Alliance Houston could play in bringing some support and some coordination to all these different groups. One of the things that unifies all these groups, despite the fact that we're all on the Texas coast, is that fundamentally we're all working for public health. All of our organizations, despite different strategies, tactics, or profiles, we're unified by being concerned about public health and the impacts on public health because of our location in port communities on the Texas coast. We work on a lot of different issues. A lot of work has been done on refining and petrochemical operations, energy production, the legacy of pollution on the Texas coast from all sorts of heavy industry over the decades. Of course, environmental justice issues play a huge role in a lot of these communities. And one of the big things that plays a role in most of our communities and is going to expand rapidly looking ahead over the next few decades on the Texas coast is the increase in goods movement and the logistics industry. And that's a new threat that I don't think a lot of folks are ready to deal with effectively along the Texas coast. And whether it's goods movement or energy, the traditional industry of the Texas coast, all of those things are going to get more complex and possibly more threatening for communities because of things like the expansion of the Panama Canal, new energy sources, whether they be out in the Gulf of Mexico or inland like the Eagle Ford or Barnett Shale, fracking fields where they're finding a lot of natural gas and oil. Those are really going to compound problems that are already existent along the Texas coast. And communities really need to be well supported and well organized in their advocacy around these issues in the interest of their communities. So this network will really have three purposes. The first purpose is to better serve the goals of all the network members in their communities. We have a lot of abilities, we have a lot of experience, and a lot of education that is sometimes fragmented between our different communities. So this network hopes to pool all of that experience and education together to help support one another. Another purpose of this network is not just to serve the local interests of local communities better, but to better serve the national groups and the national priorities and aims. And that's a two-way street. A lot of times local communities aren't very well integrated into policy formation or opinion formation at the national level within the environmental community. And I think that's something that has to change. But also when there's actual opportunities to advocate around a certain priority or a campaign, the Texas coast should play heavily in all of those efforts. And right now there just isn't the infrastructure within the communities along the Texas coast for it to play the size and importance of a role that it should. So hopefully this network will really build that infrastructure so when there's a national need for folks on the Texas coast to speak out, they will have the ability to do that. They'll have the support, they'll have the means, and they'll have the base from which to speak on these national issues. And that all goes to probably one of the most important purposes of the network, and that's just to attract support for these community groups, for these community leaders. A little goes a long way at the community level, but traditionally there's been next to no support for community groups in the most heavily affected communities. And it goes to all issues, again, whether we're talking about transportation or goods movement or climate change. The Texas coast is going to be a hugely impacted area with lots of different communities, a lot of diversity to all the communities, and a lot of opportunity for those communities to be much more plugged in to the larger conversation and have an impact, a positive impact, locally and abroad for those issues. But for that to happen, these communities and the community organizations and leaders need to have support. So the network hopes to attract that support so that we can really start effectively advocating for the best interests of the people that live on the Texas coast and also for people in other affected communities and just the country at large as we look at different sorts of energy, different sorts of transportation, and a vast increase in the means and the size of our goods movement and logistics around really the North American continent.